See you all. So what I wanted to say at the beginning is that this whole process of spiritual inquiry, which is what pursuing the question and answer format is all about, it's really the process of inquiry, entering into a process of inquiry together. And teachers and students have been engaged in this process of inquiry for millennia. So it's an inherent part of spiritual development, philosophical development, moral development, and higher human development. So it's a perennial practice. It's a perennial process. But before we start, I want to just make a fundamental point, which is that the spiritual quest at the beginning is usually the quest of, does God exist? Is there an absolute primordial principle that exists that's divine and sacred and immortal and indestructible and more primary and fundamental than anything else? So for most seekers, this is the question that they start with: is does God exist? This is the question that the seeker wants to know the answer to. So if the seeker is lucky enough to find out the answer as an experience of enlightenment, which does happen occasionally to some people, then they remain forever changed, because now they know in their heart of hearts, because they've seen this principle, they've experienced it directly. They know that God exists, whatever God means. They've had a direct experience at the level of consciousness and cognition that this absolute principle exists, is real, is tangible, is knowable, and it's inherently fundamental and absolute. And that's why that's what enlightenment is all about. That is the experience of enlightenment, is the direct experience of this absolute principle. So a lot of the process of inquiry and asking questions to the spiritual master, this kind of process is all about the pursuit of the experience of enlightenment, of enlightened awareness. How can I awaken to this fundamental and absolute principle in relationship to reality itself? That's the first question, and some people find the answer experientially. The lucky ones find the answer. And they go from being seekers to finders. And a lot of people never find the answer. They remain lost in existential spiritual confusion, and even after many years, they can say with absolute confidence, I don't know if God exists or not. So that's not a good situation to be in, but it's a situation that a lot of seekers are in, because the answer, when you find out the answer to the question if God exists, and the answer is yes in the form of a direct experience, this gives one access to what I like to call spiritual self-confidence. One gains spiritual self-confidence because one has directly realized, recognized, understood, tangibly felt that God is real, and that changes everything. So this is the source of spiritual self-confidence. But in the context of this call we're having today, the point I wanted to make is that just because you find the answer to the fundamental question of whether God exists or not doesn't mean that the answer to the question whether God exists doesn't answer any other questions. All the philosophical and moral, ethical, metaphysical questions, most of them still remain open-ended and unanswered. What's right, what's wrong, what's true, what's false, what's moral or ethical, etc. And the life process is a very complex process. It's a multidimensional experience of complexity, interdimensionality, where so many different dimensions of reality are interlinked and engaging with each other simultaneously. It's full of karmic complexity. And there's so much confusion. There's moral confusion, ethical confusion, philosophical confusion, metaphysical confusion. It's very confusing to be alive and to understand what the heck's going on here. So I believe, I've realized a long time ago, and I believe that for the realizer, for the individual who has realized and been lucky enough to find out that God actually does exist, for the true finder, the fundamental metaphysical and philosophical and moral position in relationship to the experience of being a human being in a complex world should always be one of inquiry. The fundamental metaphysical and philosophical and moral position of inquiry means I don't know, but I want to know. This is the most important existential, metaphysical, philosophical, and moral inner position to take in relationship to the experience of being a conscious human being that we need to be able to take if we are spiritually awake, spiritually conscious, which is fundamentally I don't know, but I would like to know. And this is in relationship to most important questions. The reason for this is that what I just explained, the reality is very complex. We live in a world of shifting sands. We live in a process of infinite change and complexity. What's true, what seems to be true in 1 minute can no longer be true the next minute. Everything's changing all the time. Like the Buddha said, everything changes. So in order not to be trapped in rigidity, in a moral, ethical, philosophical, and metaphysical position of rigidity and mythic absolutism, which most religious and spiritually inspired people tend to get stuck in unconsciously without even knowing it, is to remain very open. And the position of radical openness is, I don't know, but I would like to know. It means I'm not sure, but I'd like to be sure. I don't know, but I would like to know. It's called not knowing and wanting to know. And it's a fundamental position that offers us profound flexibility, moral, ethical, philosophical, existential, metaphysical flexibility. Because the worst trap for human beings is to be sure, is to become too sure about things. It's called absolutism. I'm right and you're wrong. It's a state of overconfidence that leads to conflict and war and all kinds of human chaos, and has for millennia, and it seems to be continuing to be the case in a very extreme way these days more than ever. So I want to encourage everybody to to see your spiritual path as fundamentally you need to resolve the question of whether there's an absolute principle that's fundamental, that exists prior to anything and everything, the discovery which changes everything, which means, to use mythic language, does God exist? Because if God exists, that becomes the spiritual source, the metaphysical source of happiness, inner liberation and freedom, and the experience of peace and spiritual self-confidence. When you know and discover that God actually exists, when it's been revealed to you by grace, good fortune, good karma, you'll be fundamentally be a happy person who has spiritual self-confidence. But that kind of happiness, enjoying spiritual self-confidence, does not answer all of life's complex questions. So the first question to be asked is, does God exist? And once we find the answer to that question, we need to remain very open and non-rigid, non-dogmatic in relationship to every other important relative question in relationship to how life should be lived. Which means, I don't know, but I would like to know. There's very few people have the intellectual humility and the spiritual levels of spiritual development. Be conscious enough of this kind of necessity. I don't know, but I'd like to know. Because it's very easy. Life is so complex. It's easy to get things wrong. And when you're a spiritually conscious person, you don't want to get things wrong, because if you get things wrong, if you're not seeing clearly, you make wrong judgments. You'll act on those wrong judgments and you create karma for yourself and other people, which is a tragedy. And you'll feel terrible about it. So remember, a big part of awakening to enlightened awareness is coming to the end of stopping to create karma, which means acting out of unconscious impulses that cause suffering to other people. So we want to learn how to create less karma. So one way to create less karma, to learn how to create less karma, is to stop being so sure of ourselves all the time. I'm sure I'm right and I'm sure they're wrong. I'm sure I'm right and I'm sure she's wrong. They're wrong and I'm right. Because the ego, the small self, the separate self, the frontal self, is very invested in being right and seeing itself as being right in relationship to a lot of complex human issues that are more complex than being right or wrong about anything. But most of us are so wrapped up in absorbed in the ego's agenda most of the time that we can't see this. We're being trapped in a very small little cage. So this is why, as far as spiritual practice, spending long hours of sitting quietly in meditation, practicing letting go of the mind and the cognitive processes altogether, accompanied by the conscious, deliberate practice of, I don't know, but I would like to know in relationship to very real issues in your life. Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I go here? Should I go there? Should I make this choice, this commitment, or should I get out of this relationship? Should I spend this money? Should I have this child? Should I love this person? There's so many important questions that we need to answer for ourselves. But are we approaching these kind of complex real life relative questions from a place of moral, ethical, metaphysical humility, intellectual humility? And the humility means I don't know, but I would like to know. And it's good to start fresh every day. It's good to work on this every day. That's why the practice of meditation, which is learning how to practice no relationship to the mind and to thought thinking, accompanied and supported by the practice of what is the right relationship to reality, which is what I'm speaking about, need to be practiced together. Not exactly in the same time, but in coordination with each other. And these are things we have to work on because it's so easy for us as human beings to become fixed and rigid in our ways of thinking without even knowing it. And most of us unconsciously are kind of thinking in very conditioned, robotic ways about just about everything without even being aware of it. When the Buddha was asked if he was a god, he said, no, I'm awake. So being awake involves really slowing down and then learning how to pay attention to our own experience. Pay attention to the nature of consciousness as it is, which is the ground of inner freedom, which is the experience of meditative awareness, enlightened awareness in the context of meditation. And the pursuit of moral, ethical, philosophical, metaphysical rationality and clarity. That involves a lot of introspection, a lot of deep introspection, a lot of self-inquiry, self-questioning. Self-questioning in the context of between you and your own mind. Self-inquiry and questioning in the context of your relationships with people that you trust. But really being very scrupulous, very dedicated, having a lot of integrity in how you think and how you act. Being to me, a spiritually conscious person is someone who demonstrates a lot of integrity in the way that they think about life, including their own, and in the way that they act. So the practice of inquiry, which includes the practice of question and answer in this context, is all part of this process. I don't know, but I would like to know. Not knowing in and of itself is not enough. You also have to want to know the truth. I want to know in this moment what's the most truthful perspective I can come upon. Because I'm a spiritually conscious person, I want to come upon the most truthful perspective so I can act with the greatest level of integrity within my means. Nobody's perfect. Nobody can act perfectly ever, probably, or even all the time. We can't do that, but we can get close to perfection. We get a lot closer than we are now. Sincere spiritual practice should bring us closer to perfection. It'll never deliver us completely. And failure is inevitable in this kind of a process, but the point is to fail less and to succeed more. So that's why, just to repeat, it's good to take out time to reflect. Meditation and contemplation. It's important to take out time to engage in the contemplative process of self-inquiry. I don't know, but I'd like to know. I don't know, but I'd like to know. And the practice of meditation, of transcending the mind, helps us to learn how to practice not knowing. If you're a good meditator, if you're good at learning how to let go of the mind, your own mind, you'll be good at practicing not knowing. And I just forgot what the second part of the sentence was. But if you have integrity, you're really going to want to try and figure things out as well as you can to make the right moves for the right reasons at the right times, in the right context. So that was my little introduction for today's meeting. And I'm available to answer any questions you might have about the teaching. But I would prefer it. I would ask you to please keep the questions more to the philosophical context and the metaphysical context, rather than one that is very personal. And the reason for that is that I'm not a psychotherapist, that you may have noticed. Psychotherapists charge a lot more money than I do. This is free dharma. So, and also in my belief system, in the teaching of evolutionary enlightenment, I believe that if we can live in alignment with these enlightenment principles, these philosophical and metaphysical, moral and ethical, spiritual principles, our personal neuroses will be solved, worked out through the Dharma in a much higher context than one that is purely and painfully personal. Enlightenment exists in a different dimension than the dimension that the ego exists in. So if the questions get too personal, then I get dragged down into a lower level of consciousness in which I'm not an expert. I'm not a psychotherapist. But I can help people to see a lot of these personal questions from a higher perspective, and the realization of the higher perspective itself can offer us solutions, different ways of seeing difficult predicaments in ways that are inherently liberating and profound. And I think these days this distinction is getting a little muddied. So I'm trying to keep a very clear line between these two worlds. So I don't know, but I'd like to know. Should become. We want it to become our perennial resting place. It's a place where we always want to be coming from a place of not knowing but wanting to know. We want to become so deeply humble, spiritually humble, philosophically humble, intellectually humble, that we're always able to come from a place of not knowing, not already knowing. I don't already know, but indeed I would earnestly like to know. So we're very open. And oh yeah, what I wanted to say before was that the problem with this no, I said it already, but the problem is that the ego gets very invested in being right. The ego gets very invested in being the one who knows the right answers to the questions in public and in private. So if your ego is very invested in being right, you might be holding on to a whole array of perspectives that are completely wrong, but you don't want to let go of them because it makes your ego feel better. That's being spiritually dishonest. And an unconscious person can be spiritually dishonest without even knowing it. So this territory is complex and confusing, but I'm here to help. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and see what I can do.
I haven't gotten any questions yet, Andrew. So please write your question in the chat box if you have a question. So now I have a few questions, Andrew. The first is from Pramod. He's asking, what is the significance of prayer? Anything offered to the invisible divine? Who is this offered to? Since in an absolute sense, this is viewed as an arising in and towards the same field it appeared in, so does it become a position of you praying to you?
Well, the practice of prayer or promote it involves what they call the second face of God, which you heard me speak about. So the first face of God is the experience of the vibration of I or I am. It's the conscious awareness of the source of the experience of the I experience, the I am. It's a vibration of pure being. That's the first face of God is I am, which is the meditation object in Advaita Vedanta, for example. The I vibration is the I am vibration. It's the first face of God. Second face of God is the great other, the great thou. I am nothing and you are everything. I am small and you are enormous. I bow before your inconceivable greatness and sublimity. The second face of God is when we experience profound humility in the face of the Absolute. And that's the context in which the practice of prayer is engaged in. We seek help, guidance, support, relief from the God principle, the Absolute principle, in the form of the great other. And this has obviously been a perennial human practice and engagement for millennia and continues to be today, and is powerful. And the third face of God, of course, is God as the evolutionary process, God as it, I, we, it. God is the cosmic process of evolutionary panentheism, seeing God as this great process that we're all a part of. But from the perspective of absolute non-duality, there's only one. From the perspective of absolute non-duality, there's only one. So you could say that we're ultimately praying to our own self in the form of God as the great other. Is what you mentioned in your question. which is from a perspective of absolute non-duality, is obviously always true. But if the relationship with God is the great other, or the great thou, to be truly profound and powerful and inherently liberating, we need to submit to God as the great other. It's when the ego gives up, not my will, but thy will be done. So it doesn't really work if you say, not my will, but thy will be done to yourself. sounds like some kind of weird ego trip. So if worshiping the absolute principle in terms of the form of the great other is to be taken seriously and to have spiritual power, it has to be a context in which we bow down, literally or metaphysically. We bow down in utter humility and surrender to the supreme power of the great other. And it is to he or she or it that we ask for help and admit powerlessness. Okay?
Thank you, Andrew. It helps clarify, because sometimes it seems that a prayer arises on its own accord, and that's what led to questioning what's happening.
Yeah, sure. It might help if you get down on your knees when that happens. If you start to feel these very devotional feelings that express submission and surrender, if you feel them rising in your heart, it might be good to bow down and to let yourself be swept up and swept away in these devotional feelings. It'll help. It can help you to transcend the ego, transcend the mind, and let the power of prayer really overwhelm you. If that happens. But it's good for those of us who live the spiritual life in earnest, for those of us who live the spiritual life in earnest, including you, it's good to do spiritual practice in the context of a kind of a conscious experience of devotion and submission, where we consciously embrace the second face of God as part and parcel of our spiritual practice, as an inherent part of our spiritual practice and engagement. So we're not treating the absolute principle like our best friend or like our buddy, like our bro. But we say, no, thou art that, thou art my own true self in the form of the greatest, most unimaginable goodness and greatness that exists in the universe. You are everything, and I submit unconditionally to you. It's very good it's very helpful to help us to transcend the small self of the ego. It challenges our postmodern sensibilities for sure, but so what? If we are truly to awaken to enlightened awareness, then our postmodern sensibilities must be challenged, along with our pre-modern, modern, and metamodern sensibilities also. Okay?
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
The next question is from Maureen. She is asking, I know the answers to spiritual questions before I can ask them. What is this? Is it ego?
I don't know. Depends if you depends if you have the questions right or wrong. I can't know without knowing what the question is and what the answer is. It could be a sign that you're enlightened. Or it could be a sign that you're an egomaniac. It's hard to tell without knowing the actual question and answer. But if you feel that the answers are coming spontaneously from a part of you that exists beyond your mind, And the answers feel, from a perspective of your awakened intuition, inherently true, and coming from a place of kind of great depth and poignancy, then you might be on the right track. You might be in touch with some real radical depth and spiritual potential.
That seems to be more what it is, what you just described.
Yes.
I think I've had fear of ego as I experienced this. And that's why I asked that question. But it does seem more sincere, powerful, beautiful, actually.
Well, you should trust it then. If the fact
I
that you're
think that,
you're afraid of the ego is good.
yeah.
It's a sign of your humility. It doesn't mean you shouldn't trust the deepest part of your own self. That's why in a lot of the metaphysical traditions, including this one, we make a distinction between small self and big self, true self and false self. It's for this reason. Because in the enlightenment traditions tell us that your true self, Maureen, and my true self, is already liberated. It's already self-liberated. It just needs to be realized. It already exists. It's already free. It means Maureen as her true self is already liberated. Maureen as her ego is not. So Maureen awakens to her true self. And from the perspective of her true self, she's already liberated. She's already enlightened. And when you realize that, my dear, then you say, well, that's a pretty good deal. When you start to experience the pulsation and vibration of your true self already awake in you, awakening to itself within you, you realize that liberation is already at hand. It doesn't exist in the future. It exists inherently right now in the form of your own true self. It just needs to be realized, recognized, surrendered to, and accepted. And that's a great gift. Now the ego.
I like that.
Okay,
I like that. That's a very good deal. Yeah, that really helps me because it is. I feel like that's a very good deal.
Yeah, because it means you're already home. It means you don't have to go on a long journey. It means at the level of the true self, you are always already there. So that becomes your own good fortune. And then all you need to do is rest into that recognition, rest into that knowledge with trust and faith and surrender. And then your liberation is accomplished. It just has to be lived.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much.
The next question is from Mohan. Hi, Andrew G. I'm finding it very difficult to focus on self-awareness. I struggle to say no to people like beggars because I feel a strong connection with everyone I meet. While this is sometimes works well, at other times it scatters my focus.
Can you read the question again?
Hi, Andrew G. I'm finding it very difficult to focus on self-awareness. I struggle to say no to people like beggars because I feel a strong connection with everyone I meet. While this sometimes works well, at other times it scatters my focus.
Well, Mohan, I think we all have those kind of problems. So it doesn't sound like such a big problem. Sometimes. Hello?
Yes, Andrewji.
Hi.
Hi. It's like it's like more of egocentric that is kind of facing that my mind these days like more of egocentric, like s- just not able to allow myself this.
So yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I would encourage you not to make a problem out of it. If that's can you turn off your microphone? You turn off your microphone?
Mohan, you have to turn off your microphone. We get a lot of noise. You have to turn off your microphone, please.
That's better. Thank you. So the mind and the ego can be troublesome, can be annoying, like pests, or you don't have to. You turn off the microphone, but don't turn off your camera. Mohan, turn your camera back on, not the microphone.
It looks like he had to attend the situation there. And
Enlightenment in daily life.
exactly. In India.
Okay, let's keep going.
Shall I give you the next?
Yeah.
Next question is from Natalia. And she is asking, Namaste, what is the main qualities of consciousness? Thank you.
Freedom, bliss, peace. Unconditional freedom, bliss, and peace. How's that sound?
Yes, it sounds good. Because why I ask this question? Because sometimes I meet criticism, and like somebody want to tell you, oh, this is not consciousness, not conscious act or something. The teachers like to say that kind of things.
Is this
And
Natasha?
yes.
Oh, hi. Where are you?
In Russia.
Oh, okay. I didn't recognize you. Then I recognize your voice.
I see.
Okay, go say the question again. Sorry.
So sometimes the teachers tell us to something with the criticism, with the maybe from the good intention, but it sounds like don't do this. This is unconscious act. So that's why this question came to me. What is the main qualities of the consciousness? I think it's first of all love on the first place, and then this criticism and something that you doing wrong or something.
Well, I think the issue here, Natasha, is that we want to learn how to come from a pure motivation. You understand the word motivation?
Mm-hmm.
So we want to understand what's pure motivation. And in the enlightenment context, we make a distinction between egoic motivation and more of a pure motivation where there's no ego or self-interest. So is our actions and choices coming from a pure motive, a pure motivation? Or are we small-minded and selfish? So as we spiritually develop, we want to go from being small-minded and selfish to expressing more of a pure, spiritually inspired motivation. And if you get to know people, you can tell over time people's relationship to sex, relationship to money, relationship to trustworthiness. You get to find out what somebody cares about, and whether someone has a pure motivation or whether they're ultimately a selfish person. And it takes time, because most people you can't tell right away. You can meet a person who can seem very selfless and very trustworthy, but then you may find out over time that they're not, that they're actually very selfish and small-minded. have a big ego. And other people can be very, very beautiful, authentically beautiful, and very selfless, and very spiritually developed. But it takes time to find out these things. And a big part of spiritual development is cultivating this capacity to have a pure motive or pure motivation, learning how to cultivate this capacity for pure motivation in relationship to the choices we make and the actions we take in life. And someone who expresses pure motivation is someone who's spiritually trustworthy, which means they won't take advantage of your kindness or your compassion or your love, your generosity. But that's very rare. Make sense?
Yes, exactly. It's how it is. That's what I actually meet now in my life. I meet many different knowledge systems. Everything is very different, like Advaita, Fourth Way School, different things. And it's exactly how you say, it takes time.
It takes time. Are you coming to India this year?
Yes, coming soon.
Oh, good. It'd be nice to see you again.
Yes, we see us very soon.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
The next question is from Carrie. She is asking, what do you say to the thought that it takes a healthy ego to surrender the ego? And how does learning about the levels of development aid the process of growing up?
Well, I think we could say, Carrie, that the urge towards higher consciousness, which is experiences the urge towards surrender of the ego for a higher possibility, is an expression of spiritual health. When I met my guru, I said to him, I'm ready to die, but I don't know how. I said to him, I heard myself say to him, I'm ready to die, but I don't know how. So that was the expression of a spiritually healthy, higher aspiration, which is called ego death. And from a spiritual point of view, from an enlightenment perspective, that's considered to be a very positive direction. Not from the ego's point of view, but from the true self perspective, it's considered to be a sign of spiritual health and well-being to want to die to the ego. So I don't know if that means that's a sign of egoic health, but it's a sign of spiritual health. It means that sooner or later your ego is going to be met with its own death. It means it's when something very mysterious happens. When you, Carrie, or me, whoever we are, whoever you are, or me, Andrew, whoever I am, begin to desire ego death or ego transcendence. It's a very mysterious desire because it doesn't come from the ego. We're living in the ego all the time, but suddenly we awaken to a part of ourselves that wants to die to the prison of ego that we feel that we live in all the time, unknowingly. So this is a sign of spiritual health, spiritual well-being, spiritual growth, not necessarily ego well-being. What was the second part of the question, Daniela?
How does learning about the levels of development aid the process of growing up?
Well, if you learn about the levels of development, it gives you a map. You get a developmental map. You get a map of the stages of consciousness, the stages of consciousness development. And this map, the map of these stages, gives you a clear picture of the trajectory of the evolution of consciousness for all human beings. And so when you can see this objectively from a perspective of intellectual clarity, it helps you to start to see that consciousness exists on a developmental spectrum. And when you can see, it helps to give you this big picture of reality, in the form of the conscious life, and when consciousness becomes self-aware, it awakens to itself as within this developmental process, and then you can help you to see clearly where you've been, where you're coming from, where you've been, where you have come from, where you are now, and where the direction of the future, where you're aspiring to grow towards and into in the future. And it can help give one a lot of confidence in the whole concept of evolution as it relates to consciousness itself. It helps helps to give one faith. Oh, it's true. Consciousness is evolving. Consciousness is not stuck in a finite fixed place, but is part of a developmental process. Consciousness, from an evolutionary point of view, is a work in progress. It's a process that's in progress. It's going somewhere new, higher, deeper. So it helps you to see where you've come from, where you are now, and where you're potentially going in the future, in this lifetime or in future lifetimes. This can help to give you a lot of confidence, spiritual self-confidence about not being inherently stuck, but seeing yourself as being inherently part of a process. It's going somewhere. We're all part of a process that's going somewhere, but most people don't know it. Most people aren't aware of it. But when you see it clearly and become aware of it, it gives you a lot of confidence in the third face of God. We call the process perspective, and it's very spiritually enlivening and spiritually inspiring. It means, oh, I'm going somewhere. I often refer to it as you realize that you're on a moving train, you're not stuck. Consciousness is not stuck. Even if it feels at times like you may be stuck, that your ego may be stuck, it's a small part of a much bigger picture where we're all moving. It's like we're part of an ocean, or a body of water that's moving. Consciousness is moving. We're all moving on an evolutionary trajectory. And when you realize that that's the case, it's very uplifting, it's very encouraging, it's very inspiring.
Thank you.
Sure.
The next question is from Rodney. He is asking, when asked, who and what am I? What flow of awareness comes to mind for you?
Nothing particularly. Nothing particularly. Because, Rodney, I think that since my awakening in 1986, I take for granted at a pre-conscious level who I am as consciousness and the source of consciousness itself. So I don't have a particularly dualistic relationship to the deeper dimensions of myself. I take them for granted in a very positive sense of what that means. I presume that that's where I'm coming from, that's who I am. Not in a dualistic way, but from a pre-conscious attitude of already knowing that to be the case and not doubting it. My guru made very clear to me that the difference between, he said, Andrew, the difference between enlightenment and unenlightenment is doubt. The difference between enlightenment and unenlightenment is doubt. So when you stop doubting, it's the end of duality. So when I put my attention on the source of consciousness, and that way I don't have a particular experience, I just take it for granted.
What I'm hearing you say is that, what I'm hearing you say is you're experiencing yourself as made of awareness, as a pure expression of open, empty awareness without an agenda, without a perspective. It's just available to whatever arises. Am I hearing that right?
On a good day, definitely.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
On a good day, definitely. But that you said it more beautifully than I could. But the issue, just to make clear in terms of our dialogue here, is that consciousness can be a felt experience, which you beautifully described. If it can be a felt experience, and it can also be a precognitive knowing. And it's important to know
Yes.
that they're both equally valid. What creates the
Yes.
duality is the doubt, but when there's no doubt, there's no duality.
I don't know. When I posed the question, I was coming from, I really appreciate what you said because it's beyond where I was coming from. But what I was thinking of is, yes, I'm made of awareness. When what am I? I am an expression of this incomprehensible mystery, which we experience as our universe. And my consciousness is one with all of you, with all consciousness. But the uniqueness of my perspective is only rooted in the fact that I have different DNA and different life experience and culture and background. It's not that the awareness itself is any different than yours or everyone else here or anyone who I might find frustrating and irritating as well as love. That it's all, we're all made of that one thing. And my experience of a separate self or my experience of ego, whatever, is just a kind of reification of my perspective, not really anything real.
Well,
I'm just
it's relatively real.
Yeah, that's right. An illusion can be real. It's a real illusion.
We like to make the distinction between that which is relatively real and absolutely real.
Oh, thank you.
So that which is absolutely real. That which is relatively real. So that which is relatively real has some reality to it, but it's relatively real, but it's not absolutely real.
Yeah.
It's a much more helpful way to think about it. But I just want to add. I wanted to add to the discussion that in terms of I agree with everything you stated very clearly. So you're very articulate. You have a good, clear understanding of the territory we're speaking about. So you express yourself very well. I just want to add to it that the cognizance of consciousness and the cognizance of consciousness can be experienced at different levels of depth in different individuals.
And that goes back to the stages of development in some ways.
No, not necessarily. That's more the growing up part. The waking. I'm thinking about the waking up part, which is just the cognizance of consciousness, the awareness of the infinite nature of consciousness. So that can be experienced at a very superficial level, as very mild, and then you can experience it. There can be deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper felt experiences of the depths of the ocean of consciousness in oneself. Even though we're all experiencing the same consciousness as you described it, we're not all experiencing that consciousness at the same level of depth.
Anyway. Thank you very much.
The more the depth we experience, the more enlightened we are. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question is from Apurva. It's two parts. The first is, could you please explain what is supramental consciousness? And the second question is, how can we catalyze exponential growth in collective consciousness and bring about positive systemic change?
Well, in terms of the question for the further about supramental consciousness, you have to ask Sri Aurobindo, which is I think that's the term he uses. So I can only guess at what he meant, but supramental consciousness would be the expansion of consciousness beyond the small self, beyond the ego, which would be the transcendental consciousness. And I would choose to interpret what he meant by the supramental consciousness as the awareness of ego transcending consciousness that is propelled by evolution. It's the becoming of the universe, becoming conscious of itself as the evolutionary impulse, as the psychic being. So this is a trans-egoic evolutionary aspiration that we experience as the psychic being, awakening to that ecstatic evolutionary compulsion in the universe, awakening to itself within us. So when we transcend the small self, it's like, that's my understanding of that. Is that clear?
Wait.
Yes, thank you.
And the second part of the question was, Daniela?
How can we catalyze exponential growth in collective consciousness and bring about positive systemic change?
Well, it's like doing anything else before. It's by coming together with other people that are committed to creating the most perfect conditions that would give rise to exponential growth on a collective level. So if you create the most ideal conditions for exponential growth to be catalyzed, it will. And it just depends how important it is to us and how much time we put into it, how committed we are to it. But the more committed we are with more other people that are committed, we come together to catalyze the awakening of consciousness on an individual and collective level, then it can happen quickly. But the problem tends to be that for most people, this is a hobby. It's something we do in our spare time. It's something we do in our spare time. But if you meet other people who are fully devoted to the exponential growth and emergence of higher consciousness, then this can become electric and profound and supremely powerful. Then the supramental context comes alive between us. It's when you enter into a collective context like that, you feel there's the metaphysical presence of this evolutionary aspiration is being felt between these individuals, not just from within each individual, but between the individuals. There's this evolutionary aspiration that I can feel as a palpable vibration itself. So that would be when this supramental aspiration was being shared as a conscious experience together, which is what I'm trying to kind of give rise to, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a very esoteric aspiration. It's a perennial human aspiration, but it's a very esoteric aspiration because it happens in these higher and very refined states of consciousness, and also these very high and refined expressions of human ambition, profound spiritual ambition. It's the awakening of profound spiritual ambition in a group of individuals who want to do something miraculous together. We want to give rise to that which is truly miraculous together. And it becomes our primary spiritual aspiration and our motivation in life is to give rise to the presence of the supramental intelligence, really. So we can give rise to a different world. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
This was the last question, Andrew.
That was a good one. Questions were very good. Is there any other questions? So, Purva, you understand how in evolutionary enlightenment we make a very important distinction between, and it's a very esoteric distinction. Most people don't know about it, between the being enlightenment and the becoming enlightenment. You aware of that distinction? So I use Ramana Maharshi as the primordial, most profound expression of being enlightenment. And Sri Aurobindo as the most profound expression of becoming enlightenment.
Mm.
So one is the experience of enlightenment of pure being, pure isness. The other is about awakening to enlightenment that's going somewhere. It's on an adventure. It's on a journey towards the future. And they're both very powerful expressions of enlightenment, but they're very different. They're paradoxical. And embracing these two dimensions of enlightenment is a very fundamental practice in the teaching of evolutionary enlightenment. We want to learn how to make this distinction, philosophically, metaphysically, and experientially. We know what the difference is philosophically and metaphysically. We know what the difference is, level of our own personal experience. There's ego transcendence in the awakening to the being enlightenment. There's ego transcendence in the awakening to the becoming enlightenment, but they feel very different. In the being enlightenment, we transcend ego in the experience of peace and stillness, silence, emptiness. The becoming enlightenment is the awakening to the evolutionary impulse, the current of consciousness that's moving towards the future. So consciousness is evolving and complexifying, going somewhere. That's the experience of ecstatic potential. It's calling us from the future. And they're different states of consciousness. That's the point. They're different states of consciousness. They're paradoxically very, very different. But they're both expressions of enlightenment. And I think to understand the meaning and significance of enlightenment in the 21st century, from the perspective of this teaching, we need to become experts at both of these forms, at both of these states of consciousness, in terms of at an experiential level and also at a level of understanding the significance of one and the significance of the other and how they work together, create a full picture. Understand? Good. Well, it's been delightful, everybody. Thank you so much. I've really appreciated your questions and the sincerity of the questions. Plus, it felt like we went very deep. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.